You know that moment when someone checks their phone after a date? Not to see if the other person texted, but just to check the time? No suspense. No tiny jolt of hope. No emotional math. Just, okay, I've got groceries to buy. And you watch them and think, wait, don't you care? They do. Just not in the way you were taught to care. Some people don't need romantic validation to feel real, worthy, or complete. They don't scan faces for approval. They don't chase sparks to prove they're desirable. They don't panic when someone pulls away, or light up when someone leans in. And if that sounds confusing, intimidating, or quietly fascinating, good. Because there's a psychology behind it. A deep one. Maybe it's you. Maybe it's someone you dated who felt oddly calm when things ended. Maybe it's the person who makes you wonder, how are they so okay on their own? By the end of this, you'll understand what's actually happening inside people who don't need romantic validation, and why it's not coldness, not arrogance, and not emotional damage. It's something far more interesting. Picture this. You're at a wedding. The music's loud. Everyone's coupled up. Someone leans over and asks, "So, when are you settling down?" Most people feel it. That tiny squeeze in the chest. The urge to explain, to justify, to soften the moment with a joke. But then there's that person. They smile. They shrug. They take a sip of their drink. Maybe someday. Maybe not. And they mean it. No defensiveness. No sadness. No urgency. This is the first profile. They're not anti-love. They're not secretly lonely. They just don't outsource their sense of worth to romance. Psychologically, these people built their identity inward, instead of relationally. Somewhere along the line, they learned something most people never fully do. I exist, even when no one is choosing me. That sounds simple. It isn't. Most of us are trained subtly, constantly, to measure ourselves by reflection. Who wants us? Who stays? Who texts back? Who commits? But these people formed what psychologists call a stable self-concept early on. Their self-esteem isn't reactive. It doesn't spike when someone desires them, and it doesn't collapse when someone doesn't. So when romance enters their life, it's additive, not foundational, nice to have, not proof of value. If you're listening and thinking, that feels familiar, you might notice something else about yourself. Rejection stings, sure, but it doesn't unravel you. You don't spiral into, what's wrong with me? You think, that didn't fit. And that difference? It changes everything. Then there's another type, and this one surprises people. They're warm, affectionate, emotionally intelligent. They love deeply, but they don't cling. You might date them and feel oddly unhooked, not because they're distant, but because they're not trying to lock you down. They don't push for constant reassurance. They don't fish for compliments. They don't need to be chosen every day to feel secure. This is the psychology of earned security, not the kind that comes from perfect childhoods or flawless relationships, but the kind built through experience, through surviving disappointment, through watching attraction come and go, and realizing, I stayed intact. End quote. These people have seen love end, and discovered it didn't end them. So their nervous system learned something powerful. Connection is wonderful, but loss is survivable. That's why they don't overinvest early. That's why they don't rush intimacy to soothe anxiety. That's why they don't read meaning into every pause. When you don't need romantic validation, you stop confusing intensity with intimacy. You stop chasing chemistry as proof. You stop needing another person to stabilize your emotions. And ironically, that calm often makes them more attractive. Not because they're mysterious, but because they're regulated. Now let's talk about the type people misunderstand the most. They're single, often by choice, not loudly, not performatively, just content. They don't complain about dating apps. They don't romanticize solitude either. They just live. Their weekends aren't waiting rooms. Their lives aren't on hold. They don't treat singleness like a temporary illness that needs to be cured. And people project onto them constantly. You're too picky. You're afraid of commitment. You'll regret this later. But here's what's actually happening. These people derive meaning from self-direction, not attachment. Their motivation system is internally guided. Goals, curiosity, mastery, contribution. Those are the things that light them up. Romantic validation doesn't fuel them, because validation itself isn't their primary reward. So when a relationship shows up, they ask a different question than most people. Not, do they want me? But, does this expand my life? Or shrink it? That question filters out a lot of connections early. And yes, sometimes that means longer stretches alone. But loneliness, for them, is a state, not an emergency. If this is you, you probably don't feel incomplete when you're single. You feel uninterrupted. But here's the twist. Not all people who don't seek romantic validation are serene monks sipping tea in self-actualization. Some arrived here the hard way. Picture someone who used to love desperately, who overgave, overattached, overinvested. They tied their worth to being chosen and paid for it. Heartbreak didn't just hurt them, it educated them. At some point, something clicked. Not bitterness, not shutdown, recalibration. They realized chasing validation was costing them their dignity, their peace, and their self-respect. So they stopped. Psychologically, this is post-relational differentiation. After enough emotional data, the mind updates its strategy. What I gave up for love didn't guarantee love. What I tolerated didn't protect me. What I lost trying to be chosen wasn't worth it. These people still feel attraction, still desire closeness, still want connection, but they no longer abandon themselves to secure it. And that's why they may look detached from the outside, not because they don't care, but because they refuse to trade self-betrayal for validation. If you've been here, you know the moment, the quiet decision, the internal line you don't cross anymore. That line changes how you date forever. There's one more profile, and it's subtle. These people don't reject romantic validation. They just don't prioritize it. They enjoy being desired. They appreciate affection. They're human, but it's not their emotional oxygen. They don't check their phone first thing in the morning to see if someone's thinking about them. They check their inner state, their plans, their direction. Psychologically, their attention is oriented forward, not outward. They're focused on growth, creation, purpose. Romance fits into that life, but it doesn't define it. When someone enters their world, they're curious, not consumed, interested, not absorbed. They don't merge identities. They don't disappear into relationships. And because of that, they tend to love cleanly. No power games, no emotional bargaining, no staying just to be chosen. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it ends, without self-erasure. And yes, that can feel threatening to people who equate love with dependency. Here's what all these people share beneath the surface. They don't confuse attention with intimacy. They don't confuse desire with value. They don't confuse being wanted with being worthy. Their nervous system doesn't treat romance like a referendum on their identity, and that changes how they move through the world. They can sit with ambiguity. They can tolerate uncertainty. They can walk away without theatrics. Not because they're cold, but because they're anchored. If you're listening and feeling unsettled, ask yourself, why? Is it because you admire this? Because you want it? Or because part of you fears what it would mean? If you stopped needing to be chosen, here's the uncomfortable truth. When you no longer need romantic validation, you become harder to control, harder to manipulate, harder to rush, harder to hook with breadcrumbs. And that can feel lonely. At first, because the world is loud with messages that say, love equals worth, that say, being single means failing, that say desire is proof you matter. Letting go of that story isn't easy, but the people who do, they don't become empty, they become spacious. So, which one felt like you? The grounded, self-defined one, the securely attached, calm presence, the self-directed single, the recalibrated former overgiver, the forward-focused builder. Maybe it's not just one, maybe it's a mix. Maybe you're becoming one. And if you are, here's something to remember. Not needing romantic validation doesn't mean you don't want love. It means love is no longer your mirror. It's a meeting, a choice, an addition, not a diagnosis. If this landed somewhere deep, sit with it, let it echo, and if you want to explore this kind of psychology, the quiet patterns that shape how we attach, detach, and choose, stay close. There's a lot more under the surface, and I'm curious, which part of this felt uncomfortably accurate?